If you're racing in the next 1 to 2 weeks, then you're at a stage in your training calendar where you're wanting to perform at your best. You've potentially put in place 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months of good hard training, and particularly if you're training for an endurance event when you may not compete quite as frequently as someone that's playing soccer, for example, you want to make sure that you actually maximize this and you get the most out of it. But also at this time, people make a lot of errors, and the first one is that they are constantly worried about losing any of the fitness that they've built. You've got yourself so used to working in a chronic training load that any changes to that causes a little bit of panic. You're unsure if it's fading away, and what people often do is then they start doing slightly crazy workouts to just test out where their fitness is currently at, and that can then have a bit of a detrimental effect on their long term. Because ultimately we want to peak for competition, and the way that we peak for competition is something called a taper. That's what we use in the scientific world to be able to strategically build people towards race day, performance day. Another factor that people struggle with is that they're potentially out of routine. So if the amount of exercise that you typically do on a weekly basis is all of a sudden changing, that can adjust to our structure. We'll potentially like having a lot of structure in our lives, and this alters it. So again, we start to have a bit more time to let intrusive thoughts creep in, and we start worrying about what we're doing, and we start overthinking things. Another element is if you are training and you are maybe perhaps working with a class, like a group class session, and you're doing, let's say for example, your first Hyrox, and you haven't got a fully structured plan to build towards it, and you've just been told to rest in the build up to it, that might seem a little bit vague, and you're looking for some more details on what you can do to make sure that you turn up and you give your best performance. But ultimately, the stakes are rising. You have done all of this work, and again, whether it's just for yourself or whether you're doing it for other people, or perhaps you're actually competing as well, the stakes are rising, and you want to have a good showing and make sure you do your absolute best. So I'm going to talk you through exactly how to taper, the exact system that I use for everyone within Evergreen Athlete to make sure that they get to the start line, they feel as good as they possibly can, and they can stand there and just be really confident that they can just try their best, and we'll circle back on that later on. So the first thing we want to go through is just a model of performance, and one of the best models out there is one called the Bannister model, which has been around since the 1970s, but has only really come to proper fruition in the last 20 years when people were using it extensively on things like the Breaking 2 marathon challenge with Kipchoge. So let's draw out this very quickly, and this will help you conceptualize and visualize what's actually going on in your body and why we're then going to use these different factors to be able to alter it. The first thing along here, this is time. Now this can be over a month, this can be over 6 months, it doesn't really matter too much, but basically this is the start point, and then this is us getting closer to our race day performance. And we've got 3 factors to consider here. We've got our fitness, which I'm going to do in the blue line, so fitness, FI here. Now our fitness develops very slowly, and it happens when we do some training, which is a nice happy byproduct of doing lots of exercise. So it grows very gradually and starts to go up like this as we go through the training process. The antithesis to that is fatigue. I'll just do FA, which unfortunately rises faster than our fitness, but also dissipates faster as well. But when we do a lot of training, our fatigue starts to rise like this. Now ultimately, our performance is our fitness minus our fatigue. How fit we are taken with how tired we are taken away. So as you can see right now, our performance right here might start quite well, and it might go up a little bit, but eventually fatigue's starting to catch up and our performance is starting to drop down, even though we are technically quite fit. So if we get to the start line and we are fit but tired, then our performance is not going to be that great. So if we were to compete here, hypothetically, it's not going to be that great a situation, and we might start out, if you're a running athlete, you might start at a conventional pace that you're used to running, and all of a sudden your heart rate really spikes, your legs feel heavy, you're not performing how you want to, and all of a sudden it starts to get inside your head. So we don't want that. So what we want to be able to do in a taper is we want, if I just draw that line back a little bit, we want, I'll go back even further, our fatigue to come down as we go here, and that will allow, if I draw this back a little bit too, that will allow our performance to start to come up. Happy days. So ideally, if we compete here and assuming that our fitness has maintained, been increasing, we are going to be able to perform in the best possible case for us, which is a great result. Right, so that is the overall model that we're thinking about when we're going through here. How are we measuring our fitness and fatigue? And ultimately it comes down to two factors, and these are the most important factors, and you will have heard of them. One is volume and the other one is intensity. So just to make sure that we're on the same page here, volume is how much we are doing. Okay, so how much we're doing, that could be how long we're training for, that could be how far we're running, cycling, whatever that might be. It could also be the number of reps that we're doing in a training session. There are multiple different ways that we can measure volume, but it is important that we do quantify it in some manner. Similarly, intensity is how hard, shock horror. So that might be the pace that we're running compared to our maximum pace. It might be the zone that we're training in, whether that's heart rate zones, power zones, lactate thresholds, it doesn't really matter too much. Or if we're talking more of a gym sense, it could be how heavy something is relative to our total capacity, or even how fast we're moving, because more effort typically requires a greater intensity. But what we do with these is we multiply them together to get our training load, okay? And we want to keep an idea of how this training load is adjusting, and that is what we can often use in software programs to be able to calculate that there. But these are two very important factors that you need to be considering when it comes to your taper. So let's get into the 5 different things that you can alter to make sure that you peak on time and that you are as fresh and as fit as you possibly can be. So the first thing we want to consider is, when do we start our taper? And realistically, we want to start it more than 7 days out and less than 14 days out. Now, why less than 14 days? That's because unfortunately, if we rest for too long, or we don't train at our usual level for a long period of time, typically over 2 weeks, then we will start to detrain and we will start to lose the fitness that we've got. So we've really got this quite fine balance between resting enough to elicit the best performance we possibly can, but not resting too much that we end up detraining and losing some fitness. Now, how do we know how long to do it? Ultimately, it's going to come down to trial and error, but a loose way of understanding it would be, the more experienced, the fitter, and the more training that you are doing, the longer the taper you will likely need. So for example, an extremely experienced Hyroxer, triathlete, something like that, might be training anywhere from 2 to 6 hours per day, 5 to 7 days per week, which is a huge amount of training volume for them to be consuming. And you're going to need a longer amount of time to let that fatigue slowly dissipate and decline as you get towards your race event. Compare that to someone that might be more recreational level. They're going to 3 to 5 classes or training sessions per week. Then the amount of taper that you're going to need is going to be far less than someone that has built up this enormous amount of chronic fatigue going into it. There are other factors in terms of your lifestyle, your sleep and your nutrition, etc., but we're not really going to get into that quite yet. So when do you start? I really recommend that you start around 10 days. Just start in the middle between the two there, and then we can adjust it as you go. So that means you do your normal training up till you hit that point, and then things need to change, and that's what we're going to come into right now. Before we go into exactly the factors that change and how we look at volume intensity, how much change do we need to make? And this has been studied quite a lot extensively as well. So again, if I draw another little graph across here, there are 3 main methods to the rate that we make change. The first one is called a step. So that might be, we keep the same amount of training for 2 days and then we drop it down, and we keep it the same for 2 days, drop it down, so on and so forth. We can also just have a linear one where we just go straight down like this. Every single day something is changing, but it's all in a relatively the same kind of rate of change would be the right word. Or we have the third method, which would be an exponential drop, which is where we make a sharp drop and then we slow that drop down as we get closer to race day. Now we want to be using option number 3, an exponential drop. Okay, that is an important factor here. So we want to make quite a lot of change. So for example, just as a model, if that is 50%, we've dropped about 50% of our volume, giveaway there, immediately, and then it's much smaller changes as we get closer to race day. So that's an important thing to consider. So for example, if you are a runner and you're used to doing 10k runs, then you might want to drop off 4 or 5 kilometers per run, pretty sharpish, and then a little bit less as you get towards it. The next thing we want to consider is what are we actually dropping? And as I mentioned before, that's our volume and our intensity. And our volume is the key thing that we want to make a change to. And that, when we're looking at that exponential drop that was previously there, that is the factor that we want to be reducing quickly, because our volume is the thing that's going to carry a lot of fatigue into us. It might potentially deplete us of carbohydrates or glycogen that's stored in our body, and we want to make sure that that is coming down quickly, particularly for endurance-based events. So we want to reduce volume quickly. The next thing is intensity, and intensity we want to keep pretty high, if not exactly the same. Now we want to keep intensity the same because we want to be able to train as specifically as possible to the demands of the competition, which will help, firstly on a physiological level, help maintain our neuromuscular system, which is really key to maintaining your fitness, if we remember that blue line that was up on the graph earlier. But also it gives us an opportunity to be able to practice the exact demands that we're going through, but in smaller doses. So if you're a Hyrox athlete, you might be some things that you want to consider would be, you might be running 500 meter to 1 kilometer intervals at your target race pace, but you're not going to be running 8 of them or more of them. You might run 3 or 4. So you can see I've really dropped the volume, but I'm actually maintaining the exact thing that I'm doing there. Another element would be moving the exact loads, the exact weights that you're going to use in competition also, which might be the sled, pushing that. It might be pulling the sled, lifting the kettlebells, doing the lunges. But again, we want to be doing that in much smaller doses of that so that we can mitigate the amount of fatigue that we're accumulating, so that we can then have as much fitness as we possibly can on race day. The last thing coming into in here is something called a primer. Now, a primer is basically where we do a small bout of exercise at a relatively high intensity, either 4 hours out to the night before a training session, so a competition session, so that we can get a little elevated performance and we can wake the body up, we can get the system moving, and we can perform a little bit better after a patch of doing much less. A priming session, again, is very, very small doses of volume, so it could be 3 sets of 2 jumps, 3 sets of 2, a strength lift for the lower body, and then maybe 1 for the upper body, and that's it. It could be 3 to 4 exercises just to be able to get your body moving and get yourself sharp for the day. Now, there is mixed research on this. There is no research, to my knowledge, that says it is detrimental, but there is some research saying it's beneficial, and some research is saying, ha. For me, I think that athletes like to move, like to do something, like to be busy. So I think it's a really good thing to give someone to do, even just to bolster psychologically that, right, cool, I'm in this, I'm in game day, I'm doing this, I'm following a process before I get out there. Now those are the 5 principles there. So we've got, like, when do we start it? So we want to start it more than 7 days out, less than 14. How do we do it? We want to exponentially drop it. We want to drop it quickly, and then we want to hold on. Volume, that's the thing that we're primarily dropping. The distance, the number of reps, the number of sets that we're doing. We want to maintain the intensity, so we're able to do the similar things as we do on competition, and we want to integrate a primer, either like half a day to a day out before we actually do the event, to kind of wake our body up and get ourselves ready. Now after that, I find this is the most important psychological factor, is that you can only try your best. For me, that kind of alleviates the pressure that you might be putting on yourself to perform, and that everything matters on this, because ultimately when it comes to sporting performances, you're going to have some days that don't go exactly how you want, and if you batter yourself on that front and don't understand that there are also going to be many, many days that you perform very, very well, and you can just try your best and see what your body is capable of, I think that can crush some people. And ultimately, while we want people to be relaxed, we want you to be able to get into a state of flow rather than over-analyzing what you're doing and kind of building yourself down realistically by creating that psychological pressure. So my final word would be, just try your very best and see what your body is capable on that day. So if you've watched this video, you enjoyed this approach, you're wanting a more detailed strategy, someone to do the heavy lifting for you, so you can show up on the start line feeling confident, knowing that you've got an enormous amount of training behind you and that you've ticked every single box along the way, then head down below, head over to my Instagram and drop me a DM. I'd love to have a chat.